Hello, I am Kieran Armstrong, and I am excited to show you all about creating product shots in 3ds Max. In this tutorial, my Mech 410 group used 3ds Max to produce several versions of rendering our CAD project, a pair of downhill ski boots. Learning outcomes are driven by real-world production workflows, which are valuable to communicate the outcomes of product design. We will learn how to translate CAD files into 3ds Max, set up a scene for rendering, assign materials to objects, employ lighting methods, and frame the shot for some really dramatic effects. First, we need to talk about importing files into 3ds Max before we can get to the fun stuff. 3ds Max supports a large range of 3D files, but for CAD files, the most universal format is .step, a data exchange format that can represent 3D objects and related information without losing a lot of information. We will go into the application menu and choose Import. Import. It needs to be the import command because this is not a 3ds Max file. It is non-native. Once the .step file is selected, 3ds Max will take a moment to translate all of the data. Upon import, the program will prompt us with some configurable settings. Set Convert Mesh to off and Hierarchy mode to using layer. The other parameters were kept at their default settings. We set Convert Mesh to off because we are working with layers for this project. Before we can have fun with lighting and materials, we will need to do some housekeeping on this CAD model. First, we will have to organize all of the features from the SOLIDWORKS model and group all of the 3ds Max objects into layers. Launch the Scene Explorer by selecting Tools, Scene Explorer. We have got a whole bunch of stuff in here, and unfortunately there are no labels, so we will have to observe what is selected to identify what is what. Here, it looks like we have selected all of the objects that make up the top buckle. To check what we have selected, let's start the Move command and then drag the buckle. Now that we have the buckles selected, hit Ctrl-Z to undo the move, and let's rename them all at once. Go to Tools, and we want to find Rename Objects down here. And the base name for this is going to be Buckle. We want to number them, starting from number 1. And click Rename. Now they have all been renamed. This is a bit of a tedious process, as you may notice. I only selected the top buckle, but we can find the other buckles and rename them too. You should rename all of the objects with descriptive names so that it is easier to group them into layers and then apply materials. For the sake of completeness, I will find the other 2 buckles, rename them, and then add them to a layer. Once the buckles are identified, we can toggle the Layer Explorer. We can select a group of objects, right-click, and then say Create New Layer. We can then give the layer a name. This process can be repeated for the rest of our objects in the Layer Explorer. Now that our scene has been organized, we can navigate efficiently through the workspace. Hide and freeze layers, which is useful for when applying materials to our object. Now it is time to set up our studio. In this case, our group decided to use a curved backdrop, as it provides lots of opportunity to play with reflections on our product. To create our backdrop, first we will select the Line tool in the Create Object Manager menu. Let's now draw the line. Now that the line has been drawn, we can fillet the corner and extrude the line with the Extrude tool in the modifier list. You can extrude the backdrop as far as you wish, as the shape of the backdrop will affect the lighting. To get that larger than life image, as expected when rendering, it all comes down to materials. To set materials to objects, we will open the Material Manager. Samples are shown at the top of the editor and its parameters below. launch the map browser, and we are given an overwhelming amount of choices. For simplicity, I'm going to assign a smooth white plastic to the shell of the boot by selecting the objects within that layer and setting Apply to All. The material has now been set. The material may not appear correctly in the viewport, but it's nothing to worry about, because when you render, it will show up correctly. Now that all of our materials have been set to all our layers, we can play around with the lighting. Let's create a photometric light and make it emit a square light so that it creates interesting reflections off the backdrop we created. When creating the light, 3ds Max will ask if we want to use exposure control. Select No, because we will adjust the exposure by positioning our light. Now we can position the light about the boot in such a way that the square light will reflect off the backdrop. Let's render this shot by moving the perspective window to an angle we like and see what we get. Alright, that's pretty good, but it's a little dark. So let's add a second photometric light, but this time we will designate it as a target light. Let's position the light so that we can get a brighter image. There, that's good. Now we can hit Shift Q and the render will run again. I have most of the rendering options set to low quality so that the render happens quickly. Once we are happy with the lighting, we can turn Final Gather on and increase the resolution of the shot. Once happy with the shot, it can be saved in any standard bitmap format. The bitmap can then be exported into a third-party package such as Photoshop to get some really cool effects. As we have seen, 3ds Max has a robust suite of tools for lighting and rendering product shots. We covered how to import CAD models from SOLIDWORKS and organize objects into layers, which we have learned is helpful for working with setting up a scene and applying light to that scene. By no means have we exhausted all of the options, however. We hope that this video has given you a basic introduction into using 3ds Max for product rendering. Use the tools imaginatively, and we are sure that you will achieve fantastic results. Thank you for watching.